from hard experience that this technique is actually extremely difficult. It's as sophisticated as the mud brick architecture of the Dufufa. This technique may be ancient, but it's perfectly adapted to the conditions here. The red slip is designed to get the surface of the pot just right, porous enough for slow evaporation to keep the contents cool. These continuities of tradition and practice are an even more important insight into the culture of ancient Nubia, because the Nubians of Kerma never developed writing. But archaeology has revealed some more astonishing insights into this ancient city. This is where the Nubians of Kerma buried their dead. The cemetery was first excavated by an American-led team in 1913. What they uncovered told an astonishing story.
We are in what we call the Eastern Cemetery. This is the cemetery belong to the Kerma.
We're standing on the edge of what was once an enormous funeral mound, nearly 100 meters across. The center's marked by a mysterious white rock, and there's a kind of smooth avenue which crosses the space. It's a huge area, and it seems to be the burial mound of a king. But he wasn't buried alone.
Within this, we have the human sacrifices inside. And so you can see the importance of the person has been buried here.
How many people were sacrificed?
More than 300 persons has been buried as a human sacrifice.
Gosh.
The archaeologists think that the victims, men, women, and children too, were sacrificed to provide servants and retainers for their master in the life beyond. The vast cemetery itself was used for over 1,000 years and contains over 30,000 graves.
It must have been quite an eerie and melancholy place. I mean, if anything is going to really make you think about life and death, it's a place like this.
Archaeologists have also found something which ties Kerma directly to the people of the rock art: cattle.
Around on the edges of the mound,
Yes.
5,000 cattle skull has been found on this edge of the tombs.
So this would be a king or something. I mean, 5,000 cattle would have. I mean, were these cattle that were slaughtered especially for?
Yes.
To commemorate the death of this person.
Exactly, and it's part of the offering has been offered with this person.
Wealth is measured in cattle.
Yes, during that time, yes, absolutely yes. And cattle was just the main things. We can find that in the Kerma culture in many aspects.
But if that many cattle, that many people are being sacrificed for one person, one, it suggests they were incredibly powerful, and two, that there must have been an enormous cattle culture here and probably a big population that supported. I mean, that really does get me thinking in a different way about Kerma. I mean, this was an enormous civilization.
It's a real kingdom.
The scale and relative sophistication of the Nubian civilization here in Kerma led Western archaeologists in colonial Sudan to assume that this culture must have been brought in from Egypt or elsewhere. But now it's believed that this was an indigenous development, a civilization created by the descendants of the people who created the rock art. "4,000 years after it was built, the people of Kerma still gather like ghosts around the temple at the Dufufa. Although the Nubian kingdom is long gone, it still exerts a pull. And these ruins have really affected me.
In a sense, Kerma is the lost kingdom that I'd always dreamt of seeing. It's every bit as spectacular as anything that I've seen in Egypt.
4,000 years ago, the Nubians of Kerma were apparently thriving, with their great mud brick monument, their herds of cattle, and a sizable population. So why did they disappear, and where did they go? Water was the key to this Nubian kingdom. It provided the lush, fertile land on which their cattle-herding society was based. It was a different story for Nubia's northern neighbours, the Egyptians. Their lack of pastoral land had led to the development of irrigation technology, drawing as much water as they could from the Nile to transform their parched desert soil. But even with this technology, it was a lot harder for them to create the rich greenery that Nubia had at this time in abundance, thanks to the rivers which ran through it. Nubia was a tempting target for the ambitious pharaohs. There were frequent raids and retaliations. Then, around 1500 BC, the records show us that the Egyptians invaded. Their target wasn't just Kerma. They continued another 180 miles along the Nile to a place called Jebel Barkal. Mahmoud and I are following the Egyptians' invasion route up the River Nile. Our objective is the same as the ancient pharaohs, the apparently symbolic mountain of Jebel Barkal.
You can see there is also a kind of feature on the mountain itself, like this very interesting pinnacle here. If you can just see from the top, like a crown on the head of a cobra.
I'm not seeing a cobra, I must admit.
You can see just, if you look at the pinnacle, on the top, this is like a crown.
That's it, okay.
And you can see just beneath, like this size, you can see a mouth of a cobra, and even you can, if you concentrate, you can see like a part of the eye.
I think, so we're looking at something which is sitting like that, and you can imagine a sort of dancing cobra, and on its head.
Yes.
And there's a crown.
Wearing a crown, long crown.
This is
the crown of the kingship.
I see it.
To the ancient Egyptians, the rearing cobra was a symbol of kingship. And here was a natural sculpture which signalled to them, it seems, that within the mountain dwelt Amun, king of the Egyptian gods. They felt that justified their conquest of Nubia, and so they built an enormous temple to Amun at the foot of the mountain.
How did the Nubians feel about the Egyptians actually being here?
At that time, the Nubia was completely controlled by the Egyptian.
It does seem a little bit like colonialism.
Exactly. It's at that time for the Egyptian, just looking at the Nubian as a barbaric savage.
Egyptian images at the time of the conquest are explicit about the subjugation of the Nubian people. They clearly regarded them as inferior.
The Egyptians, they used to call Nubia during that time as the miserable Nubia.
Miserable Nubia?
Yes.
The images also make it clear that the Egyptians made the most of Nubia's natural resources and demanded riches as well as respect. Here the Nubians are bringing tribute, gold, ivory, along with wild animals, monkeys and leopard skins. And of course, cattle are prominent. They even seem to have imported Nubian wrestlers to entertain them like gladiators. The people who built Kerma's magnificent buildings had, it seemed, been reduced to slaves. Or certainly that's what the Egyptians wanted everyone to think. There's a suggestion that even the name by which we know them is pejorative. The word Nuba originally meant slave. It's clear that whatever their justification, the Egyptians claimed Jebel Barkal as a holy place. What's amazing is that more than 3,000 years later, it still is. This evening, Mahmoud and I have come here to share the devotions of a local Sufi Muslim sect. They honour the memory of a local sheikh who's buried in a shrine at the foot of the holy mountain. Sufi mystics were instrumental in the conversion of Sudan to Islam in the Middle Ages. In the process, they adapted and made use of local cultural customs. So although this ceremony is clearly Islamic, it's likely that it contains glimpses of far more ancient religious observances from this area. And in the clearer light of dawn, seeing the Egyptian temple and the Sufi shrine from the top of the mountain, I'm struck by the continuities which seem to persist. History piled upon history here.
You can just feel it's one of those special places. And it sets me thinking back about those gongs. Hearing those Sufis, those repeated rhythms, it gives you a sense of the way in which those repetitions of prayers, of incantations, of thoughts reflect back over generations, over millennia, but in some way are still very special to the people of this land today.
The Egyptians had painted the Nubians as mere slaves. What Mahmoud wants to show me is that the story isn't so simple.
It's just astoundingly hot today. Apparently it's above 50 degrees and I've never experienced it before, but it gets above 50 in this environment and it's no longer just hot from the sun, it just feels like it's coming at you from every direction.
The Egyptians only ruled Nubia for just a few centuries. And there's hard evidence that the Nubians are able to get their own back on their conquerors. But surrounded by all these massive Egyptian remains, I find that hard to believe.
Mahmoud says that if I had any lingering doubt that the Nubians turned the tables on the Egyptians, that would be completely extinguished by having a look at what's in here.
It's a temple, apparently built by a Nubian ruler called Taharqa in around 700 BC.
You can see here depiction of the holy mountain, Jebel Barkal, with the pinnacle on the shape of cobra with the sun disk.
So that that is where we actually sat, just
Yes.
under at the bottom of that
And
mountain.
that's exactly where we are now, here, just beneath the